Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, March 20th, 2025. All right, first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel's defense minister threatens Gaza's civilians. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a direct threat to the civilian population of Gaza on Wednesday, telling the residents of Gaza to expel Hamas and free Israeli hostages or face utter destruction and devastation. Katz warned that the attacks on Gaza will get much worse than the bombardment Israel unleashed on Tuesday morning, which killed 436 Palestinians, including 183 children. He's saying it's going to get worse. So Katz said in a video statement that he put out, quote, "Residents of Gaza, this is your last warning. The first Sinwar ruined Gaza, and the second Sinwar will destroy it completely. The Air Force attack against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. The rest will be significantly worse, and you will pay the price," end quote. The Israeli minister said that soon forced evacuations from what he called combat zones will resume. He said, quote, "Unless all the Israeli hostages are released and Hamas is expelled from Gaza, Israel will act with force never before seen," end quote. Again, he's saying they'll do more than what they did the other day when they killed over 400 Palestinians within just a few hours. Katz said that the people of Gaza should take the advice of President Trump and return the hostages and expel Hamas. It sounds like he is referring to Trump's recent threat when he put out a post on Truce Social, where he said that the people of Gaza would be dead if the hostages were not released. Trump issued the threat to the people of Gaza, which a lot of people downplayed, but that's an explicit threat against the civilian population. And here we have the Israeli defense minister basically referencing it, using it to also threaten the people of Gaza. So Israel and Hamas reached an agreement in January that would have led to the release of all Israeli hostages, a permanent ceasefire, and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. But Israel abandoned that deal and has been emboldened by President Trump's repeated calls for Palestinians to be permanently removed from Gaza. Katz said in the statement that if the hostages are freed and Hamas is expelled, other options would be open to the Palestinians of Gaza, including relocating to other places in the world. So what he's saying here is that if the hostages are freed, if Hamas is expelled from Gaza, then they will have the option of relocating. So he's basically saying that no matter what happens with the hostages, no matter what happens with Hamas, the goal here is ethnic cleansing. And I think that's very clear, because there was a deal. There was a deal that they could have implemented that would have freed all the hostages. Hamas has been saying, they've rejected calls to disarm, but they've been saying that they don't need to be the governing body over Gaza in the future. They've also said, I've seen officials say that they could disarm if there's a Palestinian force that will replace them. But Israel does not want to go that route. They want genocide and ethnic cleansing, and there's just no other words for what Katz is threatening here. He said, quote, "The alternative is utter destruction and devastation," end quote. And things are escalating in Gaza. They launched a ground invasion of certain areas of the Netzarim corridor. We'll get into that in another story. But he's just saying things are going to get worse, and this is being done with full backing from the United States, being done with American bombs, American political support, just full-throated support from the United States. And here, the Israeli defense minister just comes out and explicitly threatens the civilian population of Gaza. All right, so the next one here, American surgeons' experience when Israel restarted the bombings. So Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who I interviewed on this show last year, He's in Gaza. I saw he did an interview on Sky News. He's in Khan Yunis at a hospital. So I emailed him. I didn't want to bother him, but he's been doing interviews. He did Sky News. He did so. I saw him on another interview. With all the work he's doing in Gaza, he's still doing interviews. But I emailed him just asking him for if he could give me a statement, if he had the time, and he gave me a very long statement about his experience on Tuesday morning when Israel resumed its massive bombing campaign on Gaza. And this is what he told me. So I'm going to read his whole statement here. And there is some medical jargon that I hope I don't butcher too much. So this is the statement from Dr. Sidwa, trauma surgeon from the U.S., from California. He said, on the morning of March 18th, 2025, I was volunteering at Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, Gaza. At about 2:30 a.m., Israel began bombarding Gaza again, as usual, under transparently absurd pretexts. Apparently, this was coordinated with the White House in advance, revealing how deeply involved in these crimes our government is. I woke up with a start when the door to our bedroom living quarters was blown open and smashed into the closet behind it. So the bombing was very close to the hospital. I went down to the emergency department to help with the mass casualty event that we knew would follow. I should warn you, this gets really graphic. He describes the operations he did. This is what is happening in Gaza. The Palestinian surgeon and nursing leader who led the mass casualty effort did an incredible job of controlling the situation and triaging the patients. I went to the red triage area with Dr. Morgan McMonagle, an Irish trauma and vascular surgeon. The first patient that I found was a 3 to 4-year-old girl with agonal breathing and a weak pulse with multiple shrapnel wounds to the head and face. I told her father that she was going to die and there was nothing we could do about it. Next, Morgan was evaluating a 6-year-old boy with shrapnel injuries to the chest, abdomen, and left leg. He went to surgery for an exploratory laparotomy, which thankfully revealed no significant abdominal bleeding. We found his popliteal artery transected, and thankfully, Dr. McMonagle was able to repair it primarily. So, as I understand, an exploratory laparotomy is basically an incision into the abdomen, and they go in to see what the damage is. Okay, so he continues. I then moved on to an exploratory laparotomy on a 29-year-old woman. I later found out that she was the sister of one of the physicians whom I work with here. Her sacrum, the bone in your pelvis that connects the pelvis to the spine, had a tennis ball-sized hole in it, as did the skin and muscle of her lower back, from which she was bleeding tremendously. Her rectum was torn in half and her vagina and bladder were both injured. We were able to get her out of the operating room and to the ICU successfully, but she died over the next 12 hours. We then dealt with a 6-year-old boy hit by 2 pieces of shrapnel in the right ventricle of his heart, leading to cardiac tamponade. His heart stopped on the way up to the operating room. Dr. McMonagle opened his chest, repaired the heart, and was actually able to get his heart restarted. We then explored the child's abdomen, finding a massive right-sided liver injury, 3 holes in his stomach, 2 in his colon, and 5 in his small intestine. He was certainly the most severely injured child I have ever encountered who was not already dead. We were able to get him out of the operating room and into the ICU, but he also died 12 hours later. The night continued on in this vein. We operated almost exclusively on women and children, and we had no indication that the small smattering of men who were injured were combatants. Americans should immediately stop providing the crucial military, diplomatic, and economic support that makes these crimes possible. Hamas has already agreed to a 3-phase ceasefire deal that involves the return of all Israeli hostages, and by all accounts, Hamas has adhered to the deal. Anyone who reads the Israeli press knew that Israel's plan from the start was to never enter phase 2 of the ceasefire deal, just like Israel has failed to adhere to any ceasefire signed with Hamas since 2004. The United States is a sworn guarantor of the January 19th ceasefire agreement, and our assistance in helping Israel violate it thus is doubly illegal. I hope people will do whatever they can in this crucial moment. So that's the end of the statement. Again, really graphic stuff, but this is what is happening in Gaza. This is what American bombs are doing in Gaza. It's just absolutely horrific. And Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who I believe he's with Feroz. I don't know if they're at the same hospital, but I know they both just recently went back to Gaza. On his Instagram, he's just sharing some of the worst images I've ever seen in my entire life of what American bombs are doing to children. He's sending them to his congressman too, texting them to him. I mean, this stuff is just absolutely some of the worst stuff I've ever seen. And it just seems like, I mean, I don't know what to say. The U.S. is just completely behind this 100%. And I just don't even see like the Democrats even, nobody cares. Nobody cares, it seems like. But this is just as atrocious as it's ever been. And again, Dr. Sidwa is just a complete hero. He volunteered in Gaza last year in 2024. When I interviewed him, that's what we discussed. He also led these letters from American healthcare workers who volunteered in Gaza, sent to President Biden. And I really think when they look back at the history of the Gaza genocide, the accounts from these doctors, from these American doctors, are going to be what's cited as the clearest evidence that this was genocide. Because the thing that always stuck out to me that I first heard from Dr. Perlmutter, who is a Jewish guy from the U.S., not that that should matter, but a lot of the American doctors who volunteer in Gaza have Muslim and Arab sounding names because it makes sense that they would be quicker to volunteer to do this than other Americans. And that people who just want to call them liars, they always point to that. But Dr. Perlmutter is Jewish. Again, not that it should matter. I first saw him in an interview talking about how he saw children shot in the head, toddlers, twice, or shot in the chest, shot in the heart. And this is something that the doctors who worked in emergency, intensive care, or surgical settings said that they treated preteen children who were shot in the head or chest on a regular or even daily basis. And this was last year. So again, it's just absolutely horrific, and we know what's happening there, and there's just no excuse for supporting this. All right, so the next one here, Israeli military retakes the Netzarim corridor in Gaza and kills dozens. So on Wednesday, the Israeli military launched a new ground offensive in Gaza and retook the Netzarim corridor, a strip of land that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the territory, as fresh Israeli strikes killed dozens of more Palestinians. Israeli military sources told the Jerusalem Post that Israeli tanks entered the Netzarim corridor and described the ground invasion as limited, although they did not rule out expanding the invasion in the coming days. Sorry, I should have given you a warning. This picture is of a girl trapped, her body, she's dead, trapped under the rubble. The Israeli military withdrew from the Netzarim corridor under the first phase of the ceasefire deal, allowing Palestinians to return to the north, which had been completely destroyed by Israeli attacks and demolitions of homes and other buildings. Israeli forces remain deployed in a buffer zone that the IDF created along the Israel-Gaza border that cut into Gaza's territory by about 1 kilometer. And again, this is during the first phase. And they also remained in the Philadelphia corridor, which is on the Gaza-Egypt border. Under the ceasefire deal, they were supposed to withdraw at the end of the first phase from the Philadelphia corridor, but Israel refused, with one of its many violations of the ceasefire deal. So airstrikes on Wednesday killed dozens of Palestinians. I believe the latest numbers I saw from Al Jazeera was that at least 70 were killed on Wednesday. There was a strike on aid workers in central Gaza, UN workers that killed at least 6 of them. And again, the numbers from Tuesday, 436 Palestinians killed on Tuesday, including 183 children. All right, so the next one here, 2/3 of people Israel killed in Gaza were women and children. So this is from Al Jazeera. This is just the numbers from Gaza's health ministry from Tuesday. So actually the health ministry is saying, I should clarify, that at least 436 people had been killed since the attacks began. And this is something that they put out early Wednesday. So it counted from that Tuesday morning bombing throughout the day and then early Wednesday morning. But then a lot more people were killed later in the day on Wednesday. So people want to argue the numbers. I've been following this for, a year and a half, and the based on the reports, the health ministry's numbers are meticulous. They count the bodies that arrive at hospitals. Their numbers, if anything, are an undercount. Their overall death toll is certainly an undercount because it doesn't include the people missing and presumed dead under the rubble. I know people that sometimes listen to the show that aren't too familiar with the situation and question the numbers. If you got questions about that, you can contact me about why I think the numbers are what they are. All right. So I meant to mention in the beginning the fundraiser. So I just want to bring it up now that we're doing our fundraiser at antiwar.com. And obviously, we've just been swamped today just working and writing. I mean, I wrote 7 articles, I think, and it's just been absolutely insane. And we need to raise money. This is how we get by. We're completely reader funded. And this is how this website's able to function. We take all sorts of donations. One thing, gold. The price of gold is at an all-time high, over $3,000 an ounce. You got some spare gold coins laying around, you could always send those in. You could call Angela. You could call the number here if you want to do that. Also, we take crypto and then all, traditional forms, PayPal, credit cards, and things like that. So again, antiwar.com/donate if you can help us out. Dr. Sidwa is a longtime antiwar.com reader, and he actually wrote us a fundraiser letter last year, which is really cool. All right, so the next one here, Trump threatens the Houthis with total annihilation. So President Trump on Wednesday threatened Yemen's Houthis, saying they will be totally annihilated by the U.S. bombing campaign on Yemen, and issued a new warning to Iran. Trump's latest threat came amid reports that the U.S. bombed the Yemeni capital of Sana'a again on Wednesday. According to Yemen's Al Masirah TV, the attack targeted a residential area and wounded 7 women and 2 children. U.S. strikes were also reported in Sana'a and hit targets across Yemen early Wednesday, as I covered yesterday. So, and then U.S. Central Command put out a tweet saying that they're engaged in operations against the Houthis 24/7. So the U.S. has just been constantly bombing Yemen, and it's just barely in the news. Everybody paid attention to the big round of airstrikes over the weekend, but it's been every day since. And it's just not a good situation. So back to what Trump said, he put out kind of a statement on Truth Social that didn't make much sense. So Trump previously said that he would blame Iran for each Houthi attack, even though U.S. officials have acknowledged that the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, act independently, and they're likely not to take orders from Tehran. And this is what Iran says as well. Trump claimed that Iran had lessened its support of the Houthis. He said, quote, "Reports are coming in that while Iran has lessened its intensity on military equipment and general support to the Houthis, they are still sending large levels of supplies. Iran must stop the sending of these supplies immediately. Let the Houthis fight it out themselves. Either way, they lose, but this way they lose quickly," end quote. So I don't know where he's getting this information from, maybe an intelligence briefing or something, but Iran, they're aligned with the Houthis. I'm sure they provide some sort of support, but the fact is we don't know what level of support they provide, and they've always denied that they arm the Houthis. They've always denied that idea. The Houthis have missiles and drones that are similar to Iranian ones, so most people believe that Iran, helped them with the manufacturing, maybe got them some components for that and gave them blueprints. But they're made in Yemen. They have their own weapon supply. They're not reliant on some shipments from Iran. They're not like Israel is relying on the U.S. or like Ukraine is relying on the U.S. And that's just a really important point here, because this is clearly might be used as pretext for war with Iran. So at the same time, this seems like it's almost like he's kind of climbing down from his statement from a few days earlier when he said every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon as being a shot fired from Iran. Now he's saying that they've limited some support. Again, I don't know if he's backing down here a bit, but the Houthis are not backing down. They have claimed 4 attacks on the USS Harry Truman, the aircraft carrier. They fired a missile at Israel. There's just no sign that this is going to deter them, just like Biden's year-long bombing campaign did not deter them either. But Trump's saying that they're going to be totally annihilated. He said, quote, "Tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians, and watch how it will get progressively worse. It's not even a fair fight and never will be. They will be completely annihilated," end quote. So Trump, this is just Trump at his worst here. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. The next one here, Trump gave Iran a 2-month deadline to reach a deal. Axios reported on Wednesday that President Trump gave Iran a 2-month deadline to reach a deal on its civilian nuclear program in a letter he recently sent to Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The report, which cited 2 sources briefed on the letter, said that it was unclear if the countdown to the deadline began when the letter was delivered or if it would start at the beginning of negotiations, but U.S.-Iran negotiations are unlikely. Iranian leaders are rejecting negotiating in response to President Trump's so-called maximum pressure campaign. Axios reporter Barak Ravid, a former IDF intelligence officer, wrote in his report that if Iran does not negotiate, then the chances of U.S. or Israeli military action against Iran's nuclear facilities would dramatically increase. The news of Trump's deadline for Iran comes as the president is warning that he will blame Iran for attacks launched by the Houthis. So there's just a lot of signs here that are not good about potential attacks on Iran. I mean, again, just what Trump's doing in Yemen. These huge airstrikes that he launched over the weekend. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him at this point to attack Iran. And as things devolve in Gaza, you know, the region, it's just going to get worse and worse. All right, so the next one here, IDF vehicles sweep into Syria's Quneitra. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So with growing focus on Israel's resumption of hostilities against the Gaza Strip, the country has continued its military aggression elsewhere in the region as well. In Syria, there are more attacks and even bigger ground invasion. Israel first started invading southern Syria in December after the Assad government was ousted. Tuesday evening saw the biggest ground force sent into Syrian territory yet in Quneitra Governorate, where roughly 50 armored vehicles from the Israeli army led the charge into Al-Adnaniya, seizing the town and sweeping through the farmlands in the surrounding area. Locals reported the vehicles were sweeping the area for hours and expressed concern that this which would end in their forcible displacement from their homes, as has happened in other villages in recently occupied parts of southern Syria. Israeli tanks were also reported further south in the area around Al-Rafid. It is so far unclear what they are doing in the area, but Israeli troops reportedly took over an old military post in the vicinity, which may be related. Further north, Israel carried out multiple drone strikes against old artillery positions. So again, this is happening with every all eyes on Gaza. I mean, for good reason, and Yemen, and just seems like nobody's reporting on these big Israeli incursions into southern Syria. And of course, this is all supported by the U.S. All the U.S. military aid doesn't just support the slaughter in Gaza, also supports the occupations of southern Syria, southern Lebanon, the increased military operations in the West Bank as well. All right, so the next one here, where are we? Iraqi Tribal Council proposes force to fight HTS in Syria. So this one's from Jason Ditz. Syria's Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham-led government and its role in the massacres of well over 1,000 civilians, mostly Alawites in the northwest earlier this month, continue to loom large, not just internally, but in Syria's relationship with the international community. Most of the Sunni Arab states have expressed relative support for the HTS, though there have been calls for sanctions from elsewhere. Neighboring Iraq has been trying to stay neutral, but is facing growing opposition to that from the United Tribal Council of Iraq and Basra. The Tribal Council rarely makes public statements in opposition to government policy, but they did late Tuesday, calling for the government to organize the creation of a group of volunteer fighters to go to Syria and resist the HTS-run Syrian army. The council statement cites the growing regional instability caused by the HTS and cites the massacres as a justification for such a measure. So, of course, the Iraqi Shia groups were on the opposite side of the Syrian war than HTS. And so Jason gets into some of that background here. But this is, part of just the growing tensions in the region over the HTS takeover of Syria. All right, so the next one here, judge denies attempt to move Mahmoud Khalil's case. So this is from Dropsite News. So they have an interview here. Jeremy Scahill interviews Mahmoud Khalil's attorney on breaking developments in his case. And basically the big thing here is that the judge in the Southern District of New York denied the Trump administration's attempt to move Khalil's case, and therefore the jurisdiction from New Jersey to Louisiana. The New Jersey court will now decide if Khalil himself will be moved out of the notorious Louisiana facility. So Amy Greer, who is one of Khalil's attorneys, said, quote, "What I think is important is that he did not transfer the case to Louisiana, which would be away from his entire legal team and would just put the case in a very different situation. Mahmoud's wife would love to have him back home and supporting her. And of course, we all want that too, as does his whole community want him back as soon as possible," end quote. So his wife is an American citizen who's 8 months pregnant. I saw there's the video posted of ICE agents arresting Khalil, taking him away from his pregnant wife, not answering her questions. I mean, it's just all because he participated in protests against Israel, critical of Israel, of what Israel has done to Gaza. So we definitely have to keep an eye on this case here. And then the next one here, most Republicans support right to protest unless it's against Israel. So this article is from the Miami Herald, and it is based on a recent poll. Sorry, the formatting's a little off here, so if you're watching, I have to scroll around kind of, and it's going to be annoying to your eyes. So most Republicans support the right to protest unless it's against Israel, according to new polling. In the latest Economist YouGov survey, a strong majority of GOP respondents, 73%, said they support Americans' ability to protest against actions they view as unjust. Just 12% said they oppose this, and 14% said they weren't sure. But when asked if it should be legal or illegal to protest against Israeli actions in Gaza, less than half of Republicans, 42%, said that it should be legal. Meanwhile, 23% said this kind of public demonstration should be illegal, and 35% said that they were not sure. The poll was conducted from March 16th to the 18th with 1,618 U.S. adults. It found support for protests was more consistent among Democrats and independents. 86% of Democrats and 81% of independents said that they backed the right to demonstrate against actions perceived unjust, while less than 20% of both groups said that they opposed this or were unsure. When it came to anti-Israel protests, 73% of Democrats said that they should be legal, while 5% said they should be outlawed. And independents, wow, this is pretty bad for independents. 57% of independents also said that the anti-Israel protests should be legal, while 9% said that they should be legal, and 34% said that they didn't know. But I mean, it's just, man, what a crazy view to have about whether or not you could protest a foreign government. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky tells Trump that he supports a partial truce. So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told President Trump in a phone call on Wednesday that he supports the proposal for Russia and Ukraine to halt attacks on energy infrastructure as a first step toward a ceasefire and lasting peace deal. Zelensky said in a readout of the call, quote, "Ending strikes on energy and other civilian infrastructure could be the first step toward fully ending the war and ensuring security. Volodymyr Zelensky supported this step, and Ukraine confirmed its readiness to implement it," end quote. Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to the infrastructure ceasefire in a call with Trump on Tuesday. Ukraine and Russia traded accusations of attacks on energy infrastructure on Wednesday, but it's unclear if the partial ceasefire has formally started. So we'll see how this plays out in the coming days. I think a lot of people were easy to say that it didn't work, because there were attacks after the Trump-Putin call, but now Zelensky has said he agrees, so hopefully it's implemented. In a U.S. statement on the call, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said that President Trump had agreed to help Ukraine procure more air defenses. Now remember, the U.S. and Ukraine initially proposed a full ceasefire deal for 30 days, but Russian President Vladimir Putin had several conditions, including a guarantee that the U.S. would stop supplying military equipment to Ukraine. So Trump's saying he's going to help them get air defenses. And now another thing that this U.S. statement said on the Trump-Zelensky call was that President Trump proposed the idea of the U.S. taking ownership of Ukrainian energy infrastructure, similar to how he wants the U.S. to have a piece of Ukrainian rare earth minerals and other natural resources. The statement said, quote, President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure, end quote. And I mean, these are things that I think are just going to bog the U.S. down more in Ukraine. The minerals deal, the U.S. taking ownership of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, just very, very strange. And Mike Waltz also spoke with Yuri Urshakov, who's an aide to Putin, and said that the talks between U.S. and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia will commence in the coming days about the ceasefire. All right, the last story here, the U.S. launches a strike in Somalia against Al-Shabaab. So the U.S. launched an airstrike in Somalia on March 15th, targeting Al-Shabaab, U.S. Africa Command said in a press release on Monday. AFRICOM said the strike occurred 150 kilometers northeast of Mogadishu in support of the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government and described it as a collective self-defense strike, even though no U.S. troops were involved in fighting on the ground. AFRICOM claimed that its initial assessment found that enemy combatants were killed and that no civilians were injured or killed. Always important to point out that the Pentagon is notorious for hiding civilian casualties, specifically in Somalia, because there's basically a media blackout on the U.S. drone war there. I didn't search too hard, but I found no English language coverage of this airstrike besides the AFRICOM press release. Again, I didn't search very hard, and I don't want to, if there are people covering it, I don't want to not dismiss them, but just from a quick look, no mainstream sources, at least, are covering this airstrike. And this attack marks the second known U.S. airstrike in Somalia this month. The last attack occurred on March 1st, and AFRICOM bombed Somalia several times in February, targeting both ISIS in the northeastern Puntland region, and Al-Shabaab in central, and I think maybe southern Somalia. And Al-Shabaab's been on the offensive in central Somalia, and the U.S.-backed government has said it's also been receiving air support from the UAE and Ethiopia. The federal government claimed that 50 Al-Shabaab militants were killed by airstrikes on March 12th after the militant group laid siege to a hotel in the central town of Beledweyne. So this is kind of just an ongoing war that the U.S. is involved in that, again, just gets absolutely no attention. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Matthew Cullinan Hoffman. Pope's condemnation of Gaza genocide reflects Catholic doctrine. That's over at Crisis Magazine, which is a Catholic magazine. And I did their podcast recently. Eric Sammons is their editor-in-chief, and he's very anti-war, and I really appreciate them taking this stance because this is the proper Catholic stance. I'm a Catholic, and I'm happy to see, Catholics being anti-war, American Catholics being anti-war. And Eric gets a lot of flack for his positions, it seems like. So I appreciate him sticking to his guns and running articles like this. One from Norman Solomon, pro-Israel, pro-peace, advocates cling to genocide denial. One from Rasha Abu Jalal, I couldn't tell whether we were alive or dead and buried under the rubble. One from Ted Snyder, U.S. foreign policy was never about promoting democracy. One from Ben Reif, Israel's return to war is a prelude to mass expulsion. So please go check all of that out. Check out our blog. Whew, man, again, if you can help us with our fundraiser, I would really appreciate it. This weekend, I'll be speaking at the New Jersey Libertarian Party convention on Saturday. If you're in the area, you could, even if you're not a member, you could buy a ticket. I put the link in the description for the speakers. And I'm not going to do a show Sunday night, so that means no Monday show. I'll remind you at the beginning of tomorrow's show, so people who don't make it to the end hear that. So next week there'll be 4 shows. I'm going to have a lot of catching up to do after a long weekend. That is for sure. But again, follow us on social media. Support us by sharing this show, telling your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.